Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Capital Planning, Balancing Rising Costs with Net Zero Goals. I'm Jennifer Getz, the Editorial Director of Facility Executive Magazine, and this webinar is presented by Aboutenerative. Before we get started, I'll cover a few housekeeping items. Our speaker is on video today, and if you would like to view him at the top of your screen, look for the bar in your window to pull down so he is visible to you. Next, please note the control panel on your screen. This is where you can submit questions via the question box at any time. There will be a Q&A portion after this presentation and during this presentation, so please type your questions in there to send them to us. If at any time you experience a technical difficulty, please send us a message via that question section and someone on our team will answer you privately. Also, please note the orange arrow on the left side of your control panel. Clicking on that arrow will either expand or collapse the control panel, so please be sure the panel is expanded so you can access the question box. And if you are interested in continuing education credits, please note that you receive a certificate of attendance in an email from Facility Executive after this webinar. You can report to your association for the credit. Now I'll introduce your speaker for today. Kamli Wilson is a director at Aboutenerative, a software platform that is reinventing traditional real estate workflows for capital planning, maintenance, energy management, and tenant billing by centering them around decarbonization and fueling performance with real-time monitoring. Prior to his 6 years at Aboutenerative, Kamli helped build a firm focus on vocational training for renewable energy and efficiency skills. So Kamli, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me, Jen.
Awesome. So to get started, we're going to kick off with our first poll question. So what types of facilities does your company primarily own and operate? You have about 20 to 30 seconds to respond.
Awesome. And as people are answering that poll, I will provide a little bit of extra context on Aboutenerative. We were started 12 years ago as a equipment sub-metering company. So capturing real-time equipment level data with the original insight that, a building management system was not designed to do that. In the last 12 years, we've built out software around that data set and a number of other data sets. And so I'm going to talk through a number of use cases on this webinar, but I want to make clear that we don't have all the answers. We've been fortunate enough to build solutions to real world problems along with the owners and operators of commercial real estate and large occupier and corporate real estate clients. So as Jen mentioned, there's going to be a Q&A at the end, but I do want to encourage everyone to ask questions early and often. I'll do my best to answer them on the fly and make this webinar as engaging as possible and give you as many actionable takeaways as I possibly can. Cool. Okay, with that, let's jump in. It looks like the majority of the audience works in commercial real estate, presumably offices, retail, etc. And then there's a significant portion that marked other. I presume that means it could be universities or hospitals or other facilities. So I'll definitely take that into consideration as I go through the webinar. Thank you for your answers there. Okay, so the problem that we're going to talk about today is this tension between capital planning, specifically the fact that interest rates are rising and the cost of capital is increasing, and the need to make investments to decarbonize a real estate portfolio. This is in tension because many corporations, organizations, investment funds have set really aggressive net zero targets. For some of them who are, publicly traded and under SEC jurisdiction, new rules are coming out soon that if you've stated one of these rules or one of these goals, you will have to disclose how you actually plan to achieve net zero by a certain date or a certain decarbonization rate by a certain date. So these two factors are in tension, but there is hope. I want to talk through what we've seen work in the marketplace to kind of balance these points of tension here. The way we see it in general is, decarbonization, sustainability, ESG is not going away. But if you can see an inevitable trend and get ahead of it, that's where opportunity lies. That's where the biggest, asset managers, the biggest organizations, that's where they make their big bets and they get huge returns, is when they see something coming and they get ahead of it. Obviously, none of us can predict what interest rates are going to do in the future. We can make some assumptions, but currently the cost of capital is really high, and so the best solution there is to get more surgical with the dollars that you are investing, while keeping in mind how those relate to your decarbonization goals and strategies. This problem is not easy. When we dig in, it's very clear that in most organizations, the stakeholders involved in the capital planning process have different priorities. They care about different things. They have different access to different information and different data. And these silos are getting in the way of us balancing the rising cost of capital with decarbonization goals. So as I talk through this, I in addition to knowing what types of facilities you all work for, there's another poll that'll pop up about your role. So if you could fill that out, I'll also use that to guide the rest of the webinar. But quickly, usually what we see is that asset managers, asset management, they want desperately to scrutinize investments, but they don't have the technical expertise to make very, very clear determinations as to which equipment needs to be replaced when. They are forced to rely on usually the word of facilities management. Now, at the same time, asset management is trying to, they're scrutinizing investments because they see the rising interest rates. They do not want to make investments that are unnecessary. However, facility managers generally, they understand that delaying replacements can actually cost more in repairs and maintenance than actually making that investment today. The problem is that they are working off a different set of data set. They are working off a different level of information and access to the information, albeit with different priorities. Now that tension is not new. This has always been the case, but now there is sustainability. There are very often new people in the organization who are stakeholders in this decision making. They want to ensure that if we are going to make an investment, that it's in line with the decarbonization targets. For many of them, they maybe can analyze a few big ticket items per year, maybe like a couple chiller replacements, or if there's a big HVAC upgrade, they can kind of dive into the weeds there. But by and large, a lot of things are kind of slipping under their radar. Equipment is being replaced in kind, and the problem there is that if it's a gas-fired boiler, or if it's an inefficient system, you've just committed yourself to a certain level of carbon emissions for the lifetime of that equipment, 15, 20, 25 years. So this is something that like decisions being made today really affects the long-term trajectory of the portfolio. It's something that sustainability is aware of, but they just don't have the access to the information that they need to stay on top of all the decisions being made. Cool. Quickly looking at the poll, looks like The majority are facilities executives, a few facilities operators, about a quarter are in that sustainability or ESG role, and then 20% other. So nobody in the asset management side. I'll keep this focused to, facilities and sustainability, which makes a ton of sense. Given the roles that you all just stated, I'm sure that siloed data is an issue that you can all relate to. When it comes to capital planning and decarbonization, these are a handful of the areas that we generally see data being siloed in. Sometimes there has been a recent property condition assessment done. The problem with these is that, you pay 10,000 bucks, you have a detailed survey of the building performed, you get a 150-page PDF. Nobody reads it. Most people just go to that 3 or 4 pages that have that the capital plan assumptions, what equipment will need to be replaced in what year and how much it's going to cost, and they input it into a budgeting spreadsheet, and that's what they use as their budget, as their capital budget for the property. Obviously, there are issues in and of themselves with spreadsheets. People become very, very protective over their spreadsheets. There are versioning issues. It's difficult to collaborate on, and probably most importantly for the capital planning process, a spreadsheet is just not designed to also house qualitative data. So an example of this is if there's an evaluation performed on a chiller replacement, that evaluation is another PDF that lives, in the shared drive or in somebody's email, or lives separately from that PDF, from that budgeting spreadsheet. When budgeting season comes around, you can, and I'm sure you can all relate to the issues of kind of compiling all that data. Add in a new challenge. Sustainability teams have built new spreadsheets. They're decarbonization spreadsheets. So what they're saying is, for all the projects that we're going to perform, what are the emissions associated with those projects? What are the emissions factors for the amount of electricity and gas, et cetera, that the equipment is going to consume? And how does that look at the property level? How does that relate to our overall carbon footprint for that property? And how does it look to reductions over time? Unfortunately, these are often separate from the budgeting spreadsheet, just making the process more complex. On the operational side of the property, the first 3 are kind of capital planning specific, but the building is not static, right? It's being operated day in, day out. A lot of properties, a lot of portfolios have valuable data in usually an antiquated CMMS, a computerized maintenance management software. So whether that's inspections that are being performed, preventative maintenance logs, the vendor evaluations, vendor assessments, vendor performance reports. These often exist, but are completely separate from the capital planning process. And when it comes to budgeting season, those insights are often not integrated as well as they could be. Usually it's, the decisions in the budgeting season are made more based off memory than based off the data in the CMMS. And then, whether your property has a BMS or not, the real-time performance data from the BMS is a very valuable piece of data to use to inform these decisions. But again, it's completely siloed. Many building management systems live on site, do not share the data, do not even trend the data over time. Many do not have energy data, so they can't be used for these decarbonization analyses. So ultimately, what happens when this data is siloed and there's different stakeholders involved with different priorities? One, data is, quote, aggregated via your inbox, right? Like this is going back through your email to pull out bids and evaluations and analyses is not an effective way to run a capital planning process when we have these new tensions at play, when we have rising interest rates, when we have the need to keep decarbonization in mind. Two, it just makes budgeting season long. It just makes budgeting season a time that everybody is not looking forward to. It means that when we want to make decisions, we don't have the data we need at our fingertips. It just kind of drags on. Often, in many properties and many portfolios, the team is forced to use the manufacturer's expected useful life for replacement decisions, when we know from the data that this is a very, very rough assumption. If equipment is maintained very well, it can, double or more that expected useful life. On the flip side, if it's not maintained well, not replacing it early will actually cost more than replacing it. So the being forced to use that assumption of expected useful life is just not ideal. There's no record of why decisions are made. That one of our clients had a great anecdote recently. He's a facilities executive. He was in a budgeting meeting. The asset management team said, why did we delay the chiller replacement by 2 years? And why are we supposed to be budgeting for it this year? And he was like, well, I'm sure we had a very good reason at the time, but I don't remember, right? There's no actual log of why we made decisions. I could probably find it, but it won't be easy. All of this is very, very property specific. If we want to look at anything at the portfolio level, it usually involves manually compiling reports. Putting together all these disparate spreadsheets is no fun. That is non-value add time that somebody is spending just compiling reports. And at the end of the day, from a sustainability perspective, many organizations and portfolios have no option but to default for like replacements of equipment instead of prioritizing decarbonization. Instead of prioritizing electrification or looking at the HVAC system as a whole rather than the individual components, a lot of these decarbonization best practices cannot be implemented just because we don't have the data and we have to default to like replacements. So I've talked a lot about the problem. Let's talk about potentially some solutions. Quickly, why are we doing this? The first goal is just to make life easier. Nobody enjoys budgeting season. We want to break down those silos between stakeholders, and we want to centralize data so that we can make decisions and get back to let's have facility executives get back to running their facilities, and let's get sustainability teams back to putting together the best strategy for their organization rather than compiling data and chasing down information to make capital plan decisions. The number 2 goal is to make better decisions, right? Ideally, we want to defer capital expenditures whenever possible. If interest rates are rising and if the escalated cost of your capital is higher than it was before, deferring those capital expenditures to a lower interest rate environment will be extremely beneficial, but we want to do that with data. We don't want to do that blindly. We don't want to do that in a way that ends up costing more through repairs and maintenance of systems that should be replaced. So we have to do it surgically. And the last goal is to align capital planning and sustainability, right? We want to use the data that we have to our advantage, right? We want to infuse decarbonization into the normal workflow rather than having kind of a new process bolted on the side. We want to align these teams and align these processes around decarbonization. So how can we do that? Here at Aboutenerative, we believe that digitization sets the foundation for everything else. So the way we perform that, and this is not the only way to, there's more than one way to skin a cat, but the way that we do that is, many properties have surveys performed, they have property condition assessments performed, and that data is never digitized, right? We believe that every time there's a survey, there should be a digital inventory of every single piece of equipment in the building, complete with pictures and locations and things like the nameplate information. This is valuable data that is getting is only accessible if you're physically right in front of the equipment, but it doesn't have to be. So digitize the equipment inventory, digitize the nameplate information, bring in any documentation related to that equipment. So whether that's your O&M manuals or your service agreements with third-party vendors or your warranties, all this documentation that lives in some filing cabinet in the chief engineer's office should be accessible from anywhere, right? Whether you're directly in front of a piece of equipment and you scan a QR code to pull it up, or if you're you're on vacation and someone needs some troubleshooting support, right? So this digitization is not going to save the day, but it sets the foundation for everything else. There's another great anecdote from one of our users. He remembers being in a mechanical room, and he knew that one of the pump motors had been replaced, a year or two ago, but he had no idea which one it was, which pump motor, right? There are 12 different pumps. He didn't know which one, so he went back to his office, was looking through his spreadsheet to see if he could figure it out, and at that time, there was an emergency with one of the HVAC systems, and he had to go deal with that. And a few days later, he remembered this lack of information, so he went back. He was actually going through his email to see if he could pull up any bids or any get a sense of which pump the motor had been replaced for. And at that time, a tenant calls up and they have an issue, so he has to go deal with that. And he ultimately got the answer to his question, a week or two later. And I remember asking him, like, how much time did this digitization save you on the next version of this? And he said it wasn't about time in terms of minutes and hours. It was just that when data is not accessible, you end up not getting the answer you need for weeks potentially, and you can't get the work done that you need to get done. So everything gets deferred. Once we have a digital inventory, we can start building software on top of that. So capital planning software can do a number of things that spreadsheets and PDFs are not built to do. First of all, the reporting aspect of it can be automated. So once all your projects are in the software, and we've said, we're going to pay this for, we're going to pay X for, air handling unit replacement, in 2027. All the reporting from that is fully automated, right? You have a very clear picture of the categories of spend that you're on the hook for the foreseeable future, which is something that generally has to be built manually in spreadsheets. Secondly, and very importantly, the documentation, different budgeting scenarios and activity history are attached to individual projects. So unlike a spreadsheet, when we get a bid or we have an analysis performed on an equipment replacement, that can go directly to the project in the software, live there forever. We could also say, for this project, maybe it's going from a gas-fired boiler to electric heat pumps, pretty big project. We could attach this project to different budgeting scenarios. Maybe it goes into our long-term capital plan and it goes into our decarbonization plan. Maybe other things like a roof replacement just goes in the long-term capital plan, obviously not related to decarbonization necessarily. So you can get really dynamic with your budgeting scenarios and see how those play out at the property level and at the portfolio level, which we'll talk about later. And then there's an activity history. So if somebody does not approve a specific project, they can say why, and that information can live somewhere that's centralized and accessible forever. So if somebody who's intimately involved in the capital planning process ultimately leaves their job, all their decisions are recorded forever, which is great. And then there's the portfolio roll-up. So you can no more like manually compiling spreadsheets. That software is very, very good at rolling up data to a portfolio level and giving you a bird's eye view. This one of the side benefits besides just transparency here. We've seen clients aggregate, how many rooftop units they're expected to purchase this year, and go to a manufacturer and get a bulk discount there. So there's also, in addition to like making life easier, there's also direct monetary benefits here. Now that we've digitized our equipment inventories, we've brought our capital plans into software, we want to go on to phase 2 of those goals, and that's to tie in maintenance, right? So we can basically have ongoing condition assessments. We don't want to necessarily rely on a snapshot in time from 3, 5, 7 years ago. We want updated condition assessments of every single piece of equipment that actually exists already, usually in the CMMS. So whether those are work orders or preventative maintenance logs or inspections, first of all, those should be done on a mobile app these days. These things reduce paperwork. They make reporting a lot easier. There's a whole host of benefits that you can pull from a library of best practice templates. If you have third-party vendors, you can make them scan that QR code before getting started, so you have some level of accountability that they're actually doing their work. But ultimately, you want all this data to flow directly into the equipment conditions associated with the capital plan. The cool thing is that the way software is built these days, these equipment conditions can be updated manually, but they can also just be updated automatically based off the inspections. If equipment consistently on a pass flag fail inspection is passing, then we know the condition is good. If it's consistently failing, then we can the software can automatically update that equipment condition. So when you go into budgeting season, you can see very, very clearly which equipment is not in line with the current plan of when it's going to be replaced, right? If it's in excellent condition and it's set for replacement this year, it's a good time to look at deferring that cost. On the flip side, if something's in poor condition and it's set for 5 years from now, it's a good argument for replacing that early and avoiding the potentially higher maintenance or repairs in the meantime. So it's really just connecting these workflows and having this valuable maintenance data flow into the capital plans. On the desktop here, on the right, there's kind of a donut chart of equipment conditions. On the left, there's the average runtime hours of by equipment type. So runtime hours, you cannot capture through a CMMS. You cannot have somebody standing next to equipment and measuring how much it's actually running. That's where real-time monitoring comes in. So the real-time data lets us supercharge our decision making, right? We no longer have to rely solely on human kind of involvement, human opinions and intuition. We can be even more surgical, more data-driven when we integrate real-time data. And to be clear where this real-time data comes from, if there is a building management system in place and it has an open protocol, generally BACnet compatible device or system, that data can be pulled into software, trended over time, and used to calculate things like runtime hours. And if it has energy data, things like energy consumption. If the BMS if a BMS doesn't exist at this property, or the scope of the BMS doesn't cover, maybe it doesn't cover smaller rooftop units, but you want to monitor those as well, or elevators, for example. That's kind of what I was talking about at the very beginning. Companies like Aboutenerative have, a decade of experience deploying equipment level submeters at a very, very low cost. So this won't have the full range of real-time data that a BMS would have. It wouldn't have pressure and state and all these data points that one might be used to. But from purely kW, voltage, amperage data, a lot of insights can be derived. Specifically runtime hours, like I mentioned. So just from kW data, each piece of equipment can have a log of runtime hours. So now you're going from, okay, we'll start with the manufacturer's expected useful life. We'll integrate some maintenance data to potentially defer or speed up capital decisions. Now we can actually calculate runtime hours. It's the difference between performing maintenance on your car every 5 years or every 100,000 miles, right? So having this odometer on every single piece of equipment can supercharge the capital planning decision making. A lot of systems are, there's a primary and a secondary, and if too many systems that are not being run are called for to be replaced in a capital budget just because there's no runtime data to basically say that this equipment, sure, it's 15, 20 years old, but according to its runtime hours, it's 5 years old because it just hasn't been the primary in all that time. So this is really, really valuable data. Secondly, this ties with the real-time data, it ties directly to our decarbonization plans. So unlike, some building management systems might have energy data for individual pieces of equipment. The nice thing about the equipment level submetering is that we are definitely getting that energy data at the equipment level and can directly translate that to costs and to carbon emissions for running individual pieces of equipment. You can aggregate that across your portfolio and see on average, a condenser water pump consumes X or produces X carbon emissions over its lifetime. We're going to take that data and implement it across all of our different pieces of equipment in our long-term capital planning and our decarbonization plans. The cool thing about software companies like Aboutenerative is that we can aggregate this data not only across your portfolio, but across all of our clients' portfolios. So we can get really, really accurate equipment level, real world operating emissions levels for individual pieces of equipment. And this is a relatively rudimentary example, but if you can roll up your different options of equipment replacements over time, you can see if we make these decisions, what impact will that have on our portfolio's overall carbon footprint. Now we can very, very clearly evaluate the cost and the emissions reductions in a very clear-eyed way. We no longer have to allocate some budget to decarbonization, kind of get sticker shock, not be sure how we're going to hit our goals. We can state to our own executives or our investors or anybody else why we've made the decisions we have, balancing our costs today, our costs in the future, as well as our emissions reduction. So with that real-time data, capturing equipment level energy data, we can roll it all up and kind of create the long-term plan for decarbonization. Obviously, equipment replacements is only going to be one of the tools in the tool belt. Efficiency reductions, deploying renewable energy or batteries or these kinds of things, offsets, these are all tools in the tool belt, but a lot of sustainability professionals know that electrifying the critical equipment in the building is one of the biggest levers that can be pulled. It's just hard to do so at the current price point and with the current workflow, the way that properties operate. So quickly, in summary, step one, digitization, survey your buildings, get a digital inventory of everything in there. It's often the case that we can't do the sophisticated things that software enables us to do just because we don't even know what we have. We don't know what we own. Step two, budgeting software. If you don't have, if you're doing this in like a Yardi or an MRI, it's an accounting software. It's not really built for long-term capital planning and integrating these other data streams. It's worth taking a look at. That sets you up for integrating your maintenance data and integrating real-time data, whether from a BMS or new sensors that are deployed. And I have a note up here that you don't have to do everything at once. Long-term capital planning is long-term for a reason. There are a lot of new pressures on facilities executives and sustainability teams, but starting this, starting somewhere is better than getting overwhelmed and doing nothing. So you don't have to do everything at once, but it is helpful to see the roadmap that others um, have followed or created that you can follow. And I recently went to the Boma International conference in Kansas City. Perhaps some of you were there. There were two quotes that really stuck out to me from panelists, and I want to leave you all with this. The first one is that they said there is a flight to quality. Yes, I think a lot of us have heard that in the commercial space in particular, but the definition of quality has changed. And the way they said that it's changed is the back of house is critically important, right? Whereas, up to 5 years ago, quality meant like a lobby renovation and a new paint job. Today, it means being able to provide tenants and occupants with a building that is energy efficient, that is healthy, that if they need to do any reporting to their investors, you can provide them the data they need. All of these back of house things are the definition of quality today. So that's really important to remember. The other is that this came from a CEO of an organization. He said, I'm with you all, but you have to advocate for your buildings or they risk becoming obsolete. I want to support our decarbonization goals. I want to make sure that our facilities teams are working with equipment that works for them, and they're not, holding things together with rubber gum, bubble gum, and rubber bands. But you have to advocate for yourself. This was his message to other executives, to other building operators and sustainability folks. So things to keep in mind as you move forward. That's all I have. Jen, I'll pass it back to you. I'm happy to answer any questions that might have come in. I hope everybody found this educational. There were some actual takeaways. If you ever want to contact me, in particular, if you don't have any questions right now, but you think of some later, please don't hesitate to reach out. I promise, if I don't know the answer, I will get you the answer. That's my promise to you. But I'll pass it over to you, Jen.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much, Kamli, for this presentation, and thank you to all our attendees for sending in some questions. As you mentioned, Kamli, we will now have some Q&A to address the questions that have been sent in, and please continue to submit any questions that you may have. Okay, so to kick it off, do your clients typically have a separate capital plan for energy conservation measures, or all in one plan, or is it all in one plan?
Good question. So the best way I would answer that is that the good thing about software is that it enables flexibility. I kind of touched on this, but often there will be multiple budgets, even within one property, and individual projects can be applied to one or more of those budgets. So you can see very, very clearly what everything is going to cost, what just our kind of retrofits and energy conservation measures are going to cost. Perhaps we can have, I've seen, an aggressive, a moderate, and a conservative plan. How do those look, and what are the related costs there? So I wouldn't say that there's a definite strategy, but one of the ways that software helps with these questions is that you can kind of do it all and see it all in one place and and make decisions accordingly.
Awesome. So another question we have here is, how do your clients manage cost sharing for efficiency projects with tenants?
Interesting question. I think this goes back to the split incentive problem for landlords. If tenants pay for utilities, then what's the point of upgrading the systems and thinking about efficiency from a capital planning perspective? Best practice today is to starting today, and it's going to take some time for every tenant to roll over, but to start implementing green leases. Green leases are just leases that have clauses that say, if we implement a project that has energy efficiency benefits, that we as the landlord are able to share that cost with you, the tenant. Green leases, I'm sure a lot of the sustainability folks on the call have probably a love-hate relationship with green leases. A lot of organizations have tried to expand the number of clauses to include things like data sharing, specifically tenants sharing their utility data with landlords. Besides cost sharing for efficiency measures, we have seen that those additional clauses are not quite as effective. If you do want to capture tenant controlled utility data, often a different strategy like digital meter readings on an app performed by a facility operator, or shadow metering to capture that data directly is usually a better strategy. But I kind of digress. I would say to answer the question, implementing green leases so you can pass down the costs for efficiency upgrades is best practice in the industry.
Okay, perfect. And it looks like we have time for one or two more questions. What's the best place to start when it comes to maximizing rebates, financing, and tax credits?
Good question. I didn't touch on this, but along with the documentation that I did mention, such as O&M manuals and warranties, documentation around what rebates are available is just as important to track. It can get, especially across a geographically diverse portfolio, there can be way too much to keep track of, especially if it's in spreadsheets and PDFs. So getting that into software is really effective. One thing that we at Aboutenerative are looking at, we don't have a go-to recommendation here, but as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, the 179D tax credit for these types of retrofits and upgrades, the tax credit was increased from like $1.88 per square foot to like $5 and change per square foot. So definitely, consult your local accountant or tax consultant, but it's worth looking into the 179D tax credit because that applies federally and got a huge boost from this recent legislation.
Perfect. Very interesting. So we have, I believe, time for one last question. What percentage of the capital plan is typically budgeted for green initiatives or upgrades? Is 10% too low and 50% too high?
That's a really good question. I want to take that and maybe get the aggregate data across all of our clients and see what the real answer is. My sense is it's probably in that like I think your benchmarks are probably right. I would guess around 20%. Like there's somewhat of a premium to about a 20% premium to deploying the energy efficient version of whatever equipment you're replacing. I wouldn't necessarily say 10% is too low. It definitely depends on how efficient the property is to begin with, and also things like, you know, what geographic region is it in, and how efficient is the grid there. It's kind of hard to say, but I would love to know that number, and I'm gonna have our software team get the aggregated data. If you wanna email me, I'll try to follow up with the real answer there.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you again, Comley, for this presentation. It looks like we are out of time. And thank you to Aboutenerative for sponsoring this webinar. And of course, special thank you to our audience for attending today. A recording from today's session will be made available on our magazine's website, facilityexecutive.com, and at aboutenerative.com. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone.